So good afternoon, everyone. I want to say a deep thank you to the Center for Religion and Civic Culture and Dr. Flory and your amazing team, and to this beloved community, Holman United Methodist Church and Reverend Dr. Walden, for allowing me to step into this holy place. And for all of you who have joined me today to talk about, hands down, one of my favorite topics ever, preaching. You can see why I'm not generally on an A-list for party invites. And that truth given, I would also like to point out that you are also here for this conference. So it seems to me that we're probably in similar social circumstances in terms of being cool. I love preaching. I love to talk about it. I love to think about it. I love to learn about it. And to be in a space with other people who also feel that way is so energizing to me. I also have spent most of the morning thinking about what idiotic train of thought led me to believe it was a good idea to agree to be the preacher at a compelling preaching conference. But I'm so glad to be here with you today, you who know or at least suspect that the skill and craft of weaving a compelling narrative, a story in which we can each find our own stories and then maybe begin to gather together enough courage to write a redemptive story together, that's one of the most powerful tools of human leadership. And it's one of the most critical parts of building healthy human community. Those of us who know this must learn and learn and learn and learn again to tell the story and to tell it better and more richly layered and wider and deeper until it is a story that every single one of us and every single person within the reach of our voices can claim and own, and in so doing, change the world. Change the world to be better, softer, kinder, more filled with justice, a place where every person can thrive and become fully who they were created to be. No pressure. So buckle up for the next little while and let's talk. And I do mean let's talk, because if we've got some time at the end of this, I want to talk with you about some of the things I have to say. Let's talk about the power of narrative, the craft of shaping a compelling and redemptive story, and the moment in which we, the storytellers, are now called to speak. This moment. You heard some things about me in these very kind introductions, thank you. I find myself playing many roles in life. It is true that I am a pastor, a writer, a speaker, a teacher. I run a nonprofit organization called Invested Faith. What you probably haven't heard is that the entire week last week, I dog sat for a colleague's 80-pound dog. And I went to the mall for hours with a friend just to help her choose the exact right shade of lipstick. I spent a lot of time waiting in line at the post office and a considerable amount of time in conversation with my oldest son, Hayden, who is 29 years old, lives in Honolulu near me, and is passionate about his craft and his profession. He's a sommelier. Were he here, he would claim to you that his whole entire life he's been lied to. Specifically, he'd tell you that when he was a kid, he watched me finish my doctorate and lead a church and make dinner every night, so he naturally assumed that while being a kid felt really, really hard, all he had to do was make it to adulthood, and then everything would obviously be so much easier. I can assure you that I did not handle all of those things as seamlessly as he seems to remember, and I certainly never said or even intimated that adulthood was easy, because clearly, as he now lives daily and how all of us are aware, it is not. This sobering reality has resulted in many opportunities for conversation between us about how to navigate the intricacies of being an adult. Side note, how fun is it to have adult kids? I mean, had I known this earlier, I would have flat out skipped the whole baby thing. So anyway, Hayden and I were hanging out last week, and he was lamenting this ongoing conversation that he and his girlfriend had been having about competing work schedules. It's hard to find time together, he explained, and that perpetually turns into an argument about what's more important in life, the relationship or the work. Welcome to adulthood, I told him again, and we began a really deep conversation about what it means to talk about work and vocation and identity in ways that can lead to reconciliation instead of rupture. So I didn't think much more about that conversation after it ended, but I happened to see Hayden on Sunday, and he said, "Mom, I want to tell you something about the conversation we had this week." Surprised, I listened as he told me that our conversation had led him to another conversation with his girlfriend in which, for the first time ever, they were able to navigate a negotiation about competing schedules in a way that drew them closer together instead of pushing them away from each other. Curious, I asked, what was the difference? The words, he said. I looked at him curiously. It wasn't really that what I'd been saying had changed. It was just that because we had this conversation, I finally found some words, some good words for telling her how I felt and what I wanted and where I could see our relationship going and what I needed from her. And I thought about that exchange with Hayden as I was preparing what I wanted to say today. As preachers, you and I are purveyors of words. But unless the words we offer can move us from a stuck place to a place of healing and hope and connection, then there is truly very little that we can call compelling about what we do. And the institutions we serve, and more importantly, the people who listen to our sermons looking for hope, cannot and will not continue to listen to words that entertain us for a while, but ultimately lead us exactly nowhere. You and I, we have to find the thread to pull, a truth that we can summon the courage to proclaim, some words that help us tell a story that changes us and that offers to everyone who hears our words the possibility for change themselves. We have to find the narrative thread or the words we can use to hone our craft. Otherwise, what you and I do amounts to a whole lot of hot air. Two of my dearest friends live on the coast in New Hampshire, where the summers are beautiful and the winters are the kind of experiences where one sits in the living room in front of the fire, curled up on the couch with a blanket, wearing fuzzy socks and watching the snow fall outside. I love to visit Donna and Loretta any time of the year. But when I was last there around Thanksgiving a few years ago, I was shocked and appalled to learn that these longtime, very intelligent, interesting, and erudite friends of mine do all of that. The fire, the couch, the blankets, the fuzzy socks, the snow. But their favorite thing to add to that experience is this running queue of Christmas movies on the Hallmark Channel. There are innumerable reasons that this discovery blindsided me. These friends are well-educated, well-traveled. They both have successful careers. In other words, they seem perfectly normal to me. And yet they devour Hallmark movies every December with the delight of young children watching cartoons on Saturday morning. And this sounds so much like I'm throwing shade at my friends, which I definitely 500% am totally doing. Since 2009, the Hallmark Channel has produced over 300 Hallmark movies, most of which follow just a few predictable storylines, right? There's a reason for this, of course, and it has to do with people like my friends who love to sit in front of a fire and watch with bated breath as the beautiful female protagonist with a stressful and unfulfilling high-powered job in the big city is assigned to deal with some kind of professionally intersecting conflict that happens to be unfolding in the small town from which she moved to escape. Also, and this is true because I looked it up on the Google, this crisis arises right as Christmas is coming. And one of the characters definitely has to hate Christmas with a passion. And usually it's the stressed out woman professional. And frankly, I do not blame her. And there might be some projection going on here. So this conflict escalates as Christmas approaches. And whatever the specifics of the conflict, you can be very sure that it will somehow involve small town values versus the female protagonist's commitment to her career and her sold-out ethic. These moments of tension obviously are interspersed with scenes of sledding and ice skating where everybody's wearing matching gloves and scarves and drinking hot chocolate and being kind to each other. You know, it's like totally like real life. Romantically speaking, the main character will at some point have to choose, of course, between the small-town Christmas tree farmer with no money and the big city lawyer wooing her with everything she ever wanted, yet sure to destroy the other guy's Christmas tree farm and thus ruin Christmas for everyone and all of that. Whatever the conflict is, it mounts to a fever pitch, and we don't know, but we kind of do, which guy she's going to choose, right? In the end, of course, it all works out. Everyone is happy, and Christmas is saved, and the woman lives happily ever after with the Christmas tree farmer after marriage, of course. And she learns to make hot chocolate and sled with all the other happy people. And then we press play on the next Hallmark movie in the queue. I mean, I don't press play, but my friends Don and Loretta do, and I swear that no amount of mockery will stop their commitment to Hallmark movies at Christmas. So finally last year I just gave in and got them both matching socks that say, if you can read this, I'm watching a Hallmark Christmas movie. The actual truth of the matter is that Hallmark is onto something. We humans love stories. In fact, we long for narratives from which we can extrapolate truths or at least aspirations for our lives, right? Where we can watch a plot unfold and nod our heads in comfortable recognition or longing. And we especially love stories with predictable plots, stories that can dredge up from within us misty memories of goodness and hope that will dilute the pain and the uncertainty of being human. And then hold out before us the possibility that somewhere, somehow, the right Christmas tree farmer will amble into our lives, and we will at last live happily ever after. And this is such a nice plot line, but it is not a true plot line. And therein lies the difference between preaching that pulls at a thread in our hearts and gives us words that move us toward change, and a nice story that we watch on the couch while we're wearing our fuzzy socks. So today we're here to talk about this compelling preaching, the crafting and delivery of words that not only keep people awake in worship, but actually inspire them to change. I'll remind you now that I'm a theologian and a dog sitter for rare friends, not an English professor, and that's an entry by which to say that it seems to me, while Hallmark might be onto something, this whole entire genre of film they've created is just another way to package a formula that scholars of narrative have long observed. There are lots of different theories about this, but one that has strangely lodged in my mind for many decades since my college English professor told us about it is called a Freytag's pyramid. Gustav Freytag was a 19th century novelist who distilled a formula of story to this rise and fall pattern that eventually took his name. And no disrespect to Herr Freytag, but those of us who shape narrative for a living will likely recognize these elements. In other words, while he laid them out for us, I respectfully would not classify this as rocket science. Freytag described 5 key stages of a story, and when he did, he offered aspiring crafters of a narrative a conceptual framework for writing a story from start to finish, and you know exactly what these are. Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, pyramid. See? When setting out to craft a good narrative, first you have to build a reality in which your story will take place. Exposition. It's early December in rural Vermont. The snow is falling and everyone is sledding in matching scarves, for example. The second element, rising action, is created by adding all the details that will set up the next and most important part of the story. These details could maybe include things like, there's a Christmas tree farm in this little town in rural Vermont, but because of a drought, the farm may go under, leaving the family that has owned it and the ruggedly handsome son in charge to deal with complete loss and devastation. And don't ask me why there's snow and a drought. I did not write this. To make matters worse, there's a wealthy developer from New York who wants to buy the land and turn it into luxury condos, so he sent along one of his promising young associates to close the deal. The next part of the pyramid, of course, is the climax. The situation in which the characters will have to decide, fight for the farm in the town, or give in to the beautiful professional who grew up in the town, but who returned to build condos? What will happen? This is the turning point in the story, and we're on the edge of our seats, waiting for the decision that will determine the direction of the narrative, the well-being of the characters, and, let's be honest, by association, our own well-being, right? After the decision is made, there's always the falling action, Freytag called it. What happens to the rich developer in New York? How will the Christmas tree farm stay in business given the drought? Can love truly take us through these precarious moments when some of the characters actually don't have matching scarves? How will it all end? Got to keep watching if you want to find out. The final stage is resolution. It's the part of the story where all the loose ends are tied up, and there's some conclusion that allows us to walk away from the narrative relieved, and with the feeling that all is right in the world. In the Hallmark world that I'm describing, what would it be? A wedding in the middle of the Christmas tree farm? I don't know, because I have never made it this far in a Hallmark movie ever in my life. Thanks for this, Gustav Freytag. Maybe there was a time when proclaimers of faith narratives would find this pyramid helpful, but here is the thing, and listen to me when I say this. We are living in a time when I don't think that those are the kinds of stories that, compelling aside, any preacher, anywhere, should ever be telling. And I know that's a bummer, because these are the kind of stories that our people love to hear. Stories that make us feel good, stories that reach clean and easy resolution, stories that allow you and me and all the people in our congregations to stay safely within the parameters of our own comfort. But the world is changing. Actually, it's always been changing. And if we ever thought we had the luxury of telling those kinds of happy, easy stories, we do not anymore. We don't. Don't you leave this sanctuary today thinking you ever have permission to tell a story like that from your pulpit. Why? Because the story we're telling is not a static monolith that exists somewhere outside of our hearts and minds and lives. And with all due respect to my very, very good evangelical childhood, I know with everything inside of me that you and I are players in a story that's not unchanging, but instead it's unfolding as we speak. You and I, we're living it. We're living it. And our faith has given us both the challenge and the words we need to take our lives, our own stories, and to use them to bring the story of our shared community, of our shared humanity, to a redemptive conclusion. I'm going to say that one more time because I want you to hear it. Our faith has given us both the challenge and the words we need to take our lives, our own stories, and to use them to bring the story of our shared community to a redemptive conclusion. It's what some of us call salvation. But here's the thing. As articulators of the narrative, along with everyone else, we're somewhere in the middle of the story, and no matter what you learned in seminary, I am telling you right now that even we do not know the end of the story. We are tasked in this moment to push our people to act in faithful ways, to take the risks that faith and radical love require of us, to tell the truth, to tell it in whatever way we can in order to make our people sit up and listen and then walk out of these doors and act. Why? Because we are living in moments when we cannot afford not to tell the truth. Listen, well, I'll tell you a little side story off my... One time when I was my first year in to work in a church, I met Barbara Brown Taylor. I mean, total fangirling, right? And I worked for a pastor who was really, really smart and liked to read a lot of very important things. And we went out to dinner and he said, "Tell me, Barbara, what have you been reading?" And she said, "Oh my gosh, the newest John Grisham is so good." And I thought, I want to be like that. I want to be like that, and I want to be like that when I heard her talk about preaching, like digging up a rock from the dirt. And it's our job as preachers to hold that rock up so everyone can see it. And maybe we'll take a brush and we'll carefully remove some of the caked on mud and dirt. And we'll turn the rock upside down and around until it catches the light, and everyone who can see it can begin to notice the striations in the rock and the smooth side where the water has worn it down. And then that one part where if you turn it just right, it'll catch the light, and the minerally part will shine like glitter. We're the preachers. We don't have to explain what's going to happen to the rock. We just have to handle it with care, to hold it up to the light, to point out the beauty that we can see if only we would take the time to do the work that it requires to see what might be possible. Because we do not know the end of the story yet. We are living it right now, in the middle of deciding every single day how we will undertake the task of being human. The plot is not simple. The plot is not predictable. It is not a pyramid, and it is not finished. Our task then is to tell a story of faith that pushes at us, that tells us the truth hard, tells us the truth straight, or tells us the truth slant, and that never, ever, ever gives us permission to rest with ease in the idea that we are shackled to an inability to change the outcome of this story. No. We're narrators of a story in which we have the hardest job to tell the truth about the precarious place in which we find ourselves, and to tell the truth about the choices we're invited to make every day, choices that lead us to life or choices that lead us to death. We have to be busy telling the truth in such a way that each of us can both find recognizable pieces of our own stories and then enough hope and courage in the divine story to keep at the work of pushing back against systems and institutions that embody evil, that hurt the most vulnerable among us, that create systemic pain, and that stand in opposition to the story of God's vast and all-inclusive love that you and you and you and I have been called to tell. We have to compellingly teach our people again and again and again that they hold the power to write the end of the story. We're the ones who have to tell the truth about that, even if we have to tell it slant, in order to get people to listen. However, we can get the message across. Because God is about God's redemptive work in the world, and it will continue. The only question is whether you and I would like to join God in that work. I tell you what, though, nobody likes a preacher like that. I can tell you that with deep certainty and from very painful personal experience. And Hallmark isn't going to help us with this task because the story that you and I are called to tell is the real hard truth of being human, about living and hurting and getting sick and grieving and having our hearts broken and dying. As you know, all of you know, yesterday was Ash Wednesday. Props for being here today. In many churches in the Christian tradition, yesterday was the day that we marked people's foreheads with ashes and reminded them that we are dust, and to dust we shall return. And we say what everybody knows is true, but what no Hallmark movie producer anywhere would ever allow to serve as a resolution, right? And in some ways, that's the challenge of being preachers anytime, but especially now in this moment when our institutions are decidedly not offering us narratives of hope and justice and peace and extravagant welcome. The politics of our country can arguably be described as a multi-car traffic disaster, the wake of which we still don't know how many cars are involved, how many people died, and whether or not we'll ever be able to use the road again. Likewise, in many of our religious institutions, we are watching decline happen at a rate that we can hardly get our minds around. The religious institutions that you and I were trained to lead, communities of faith that maybe belong in some dusty episode of Leave It to Beaver, do not exist in America anymore. They don't. And that makes our work so much more important. It makes finding ways to tell the truth again and again and again in whatever way we can manage to do that even more critical, like life and death critical. Why? Because there yet remains a tiny chance that the words and narrative we craft or illumine or tell might, just might, push us individually or maybe even collectively toward hope, toward life in the face of death, toward a future we cannot yet see, but to which our faith is calling us forward. Tell the truth. Tell it straight, tell it slant, tell it however you have to tell it. Because our people need words for what we're living, and we need hope for what is yet to come. Amen. It is so tempting for us to tell a Hallmark story of predictable occurrences and tidy, happy endings, but that is not the truth. It is not the truth about the world we live in. It is not the truth about who we are as humans. And it is not the truth about the story we are living right now in this very moment. And we can keep at the same old formula, the one that used to work so well for so long. But I tell you what, there is nothing compelling about that at all. We can do that or we can tell the truth. And it will cost us for sure, because telling the truth is never popular. Take up your cross and follow me and all of that. But for God's sake, if you can't tell it straight, tell it slant. Whatever you do, do not surrender your craft to pablum. Do not trade the hard call to justice and hope and peace and healing for something cheap and easy. Please don't do that. Pull us along. Help us grab the thread that will lead us through the story we're living right now, even when you're not exactly sure where we're headed, because the story is still unfolding and it is not over yet. Not yet. If you and I can find the courage to give our people a language and a narrative to welcome a hopeful future they cannot yet see, if we will summon the courage to tell the truth straight without flinching, if we paint a future of possibility, a possibility they can aspire to and move toward, then I know it in the very depths of my soul. We can pull each other along to a better ending. We can do it. I love the poem from 20th century poet William Stafford, The Way It Is. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and you get old. And nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. Don't you ever let go of the thread. Tell the truth, no matter the cost. Risk something big for something good. That's what's compelling, because as one of my predecessors at the Riverside Church was well known for saying, the world we live in now is too dangerous for anything but truth, and too small for anything but love. And the thread we pull, the words we choose, the narrative we tell will either lead our people to the same old, predictable, untrue ending, or we will change the world. That's it. Amen.